Our second talk is titled Defining Our Terms. What are agape love and forgiveness? And the speaker for that talk is Dr. Robert Enright. Dr. Robert Enright holds the Aristotelian Professorship in Forgiveness Science within the Department of Educational Psychology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He's a licensed psychologist and is co-founder of the International Forgiveness Institute. He is the first to publish a scientific study on the topic of person-to-person forgiveness in 1989. Dr. Enright is the author or editor of 7 books and over 150 publications centered on social development and the psychology of forgiveness. He pioneered research on forgiveness therapy and forgiveness education. His latest endeavors include forgiveness education for students in various world communities. For example, Iran, Israel, Monrovia, Northern Ireland, the Philippines, and Taiwan, and forgiveness therapy with those in correctional institutions. This year, the American Psychological Association honored the psychological science of forgiveness by giving Dr. Enright its highest award, the Gold Medal Award for Impact in Psychology. Let's welcome Dr. Enright to the stage.
Thank you, Dr. Kim, for the introduction, and thank you all for being here. We made it through a pandemic even, and we did it through the heroic efforts of the teachers and the students, and I want to thank you for your heroism. It's important to understand stories, as Mr. Little told you. My job, as it says up here, so I have to be obedient to my slide, is to ask, what is forgiveness? What is agape love? And what I think is important is, although you've seen these 2 case studies, the ancient Greeks basically tell us that if we really want to know something, even prior to the stories, we didn't do that today, we have to ask the question, what is it? What do we mean by the terms? Socrates started almost all of his dialogues through Plato doing that. So we're going to be obedient to the ancient idea and now ask, what is agape love and forgiveness? So let's see. There we go. So what do we mean then by these 2 terms? It's very important to avoid error. I learned that from the 13th century philosopher and theologian Thomas Aquinas, who said, if you make little errors in the beginning, it's going to end with very large errors at the end. And we definitely want to avoid that. So we want to take a look at what we really mean by these. Right? I have learned that both love and forgiveness are choices. That's what I like about them. You're not forced to love, as David Keel was not forced to love. Right? You're not forced to forgive. You're forced, in some cases, to engage in certain moral virtues like justice. If you're not just in certain ways, like obeying traffic signals, you could be arrested. Not so with regard to love and forgiveness. They are moral virtues. All right, we'll talk about that in a minute. And what I also like about them is they cut across the vast majority of the ancient ideas, whether it's Hebrew, Christian, Islamic, Buddhist, Hindu, even secular humanism. Most people want to be moral. We owe a debt to the first printed words on both love and forgiveness from the Hebrew culture. First written down in the Hebrew culture 3,400 years ago. But as the people before me said, we don't talk about it much. It leaves me scratching my head. How is it that forgiveness and love could have been written down 3,400 years ago and spread to so many ancient kind of views, and yet, if Dr. Kim is right, this may be the very first conference ever in the history of the world talking about these two together? How have we missed that? Thank you for being here. So then, what is a moral virtue? I learned this from my buddy Aristotle, right? From about 300 BC. And he tells me that all moral virtues, whether it's justice or patience or kindness or love or forgiveness, have certain characteristics, and here are 5 of them. All moral virtues are concerned with the good of human interaction, goodness toward others and toward the self. The person engaging in a moral virtue knows it is good. It's in the mind. The person is motivated to do good. That's in the feelings, in the heart. Right? We have to not just change the living conditions of those without homes. We have to change the heart. It's the feelings. We also have to practice the virtue. That's the behavioral side. And we're all imperfect. Right? Aristotle just humbled me with that. I am an imperfect communicator about what these are to you, and you're an imperfect hearer, but we're going to do the best we can, okay? Because he tells us we're always growing in these moral virtues, and we never really reach the end. So there's something to look forward to in your life. You can always grow more in the themes of forgiveness and love and justice and all the rest of them. So then what do we mean by agape love first? Right? What is its essence? Again, I'm learning from my buddy Aristotle. He would always ask, what is the essence of something? What is the bottom line of it? Now, he doesn't mean this is what it is for you personally in your heart today, primarily because you and I are growing in this moral virtue. So what you're hearing is the highest level of what this is, okay? This is where we're heading, you and I, when we're trying to understand what agape love is. And so here's a definition of agape love. Ready? First of all, it's a decision in the thought, it's a decision to be of service to particular people, in particular, for their own sake. You're motivated to help the person, that's the heart. You soften feelings toward the other, that's more of the heart. Then you behave directly toward these individuals concretely and specifically. Agape love takes effort. It can be painful for the one giving this effort. That's why it is heroic. It's a heroic virtue. Right? Maybe that's why it hasn't been talked about very much, even though it started 3,400 years ago. Maybe it's a little harder than sitting in your hammock eating Cheetos and saying all is well. Because it challenges us to grow in our humanity, you see. It challenges us to get out of that hammock and to do something specifically for other people. Perhaps the leading modern philosopher for agape love is Gene Outca, 1972 classic book, Agape and Ethical Analysis. And he says this, to go along with what I've said, he is my teacher. What I said in the previous slide, I learned from him, okay? There's equal regard for all persons, regardless of certain characteristics, whether someone is smarter or richer. There is self-sacrifice, he says, in his secular book. There's self-sacrifice, so that you are giving to others specifically without necessarily counting the cost. All right? If someone's hungry and someone has a banquet and gives a little bit of that banquet to others, that's not agape love. But if we have someone hungry who hasn't eaten for a while, who has a sandwich, and gives part of that sandwich to another, that's from the heart. That's from the difficulty of it toward a particular person. And that's agape love. Aristotle also tells me that if you're trying to understand a particular moral virtue, be sure to ask yourself this very important question. What is it not? Because I find when people use the term forgiveness or love, they oftentimes are not really defining that term. They have something else in mind. And then it's easy to criticize that which they have in mind, but it's not what it is. Right? And so Aristotle tells us that we have to ask that question, what is agape love not? And it's not what the field of social science these days calls compassionate love, which is a general love for all humanity. It's much easier for me to sit in my hammock eating Cheetos and saying, I love you, man, okay? Without doing anything, okay? I've got love for you, man. Pass the Cheetos. That's not agape love. It's laudatory to have love for all people, but if you roll up your sleeves and go into the world and help someone who's hurting, that's different. Right? It's not the same as altruism. Altruism is a selfless giving, but a millionaire can give $100 to the poor and it doesn't hurt the millionaire at all. Right? But if you only have $100 and someone needs 50 of that and you give it out of the goodness of your heart and that costs you, or you cannot fill up your gas tank with gasoline these days, right? That's costing you. That is the agape love. It's not friendship love. Aristotle was very big on friendship love. He called it philia, where we get the word Philadelphia. It's give and take kind of love. That's laudatory and that's important, and Aristotle liked that very much, but that's a very good kind of love because it's not costly. You're good to me, I'm good to you. Wonderful, right? I like it, and we should foster that, but that's not what agape love is. And it's not general reciprocity in all cases, because a lot of times, those toward whom you show agape love can't reciprocate. And you do it anyway. There literally is no monetary reward for you or your picture appearing on Facebook. Okay? You can do it quietly. Why? For the other person. And it's not burnout. You see, people who are skeptical about these moral virtues oftentimes define it in a negative way so they can dismiss it. And I've heard very often the idea, don't you dare go toward other people that's hard for you, where you really have to get out of your hammock and put the Cheetos away for a while. What are you doing for yourself? This is ridiculous. Don't do this. You're going to burn yourself out. They don't understand the idea here that there's much more to this that includes joy. Here's two more clarifications on agape love. Practicing agape does not imply that the service is centered only on material needs, such as binding the leg of a person who's hurt. It can also include emotional needs of the other person, where you stay with someone who's depressed for the night. That's an example of agape love. as another clarification, the joy an agape love practitioner experiences may not derive principally from a physical act realized in a physical way from the other. The joy comes from the heart of helping the other's heart. That's what agape love is. And we shouldn't easily dismiss it by saying it's general love for all people or it's dangerous because it's going to burn me out. That's the paradox of agape. When you give in terms of the thinking, the feeling, and the behaving willingly with your own free will, you are refreshed. What about forgiveness? What is the essence of forgiveness? What does it mean? Not necessarily on its very highest level, but on a high level that you and I might not reach yet, remember. I'm telling you where we're heading, you and I. Okay? So when I look at forgiveness across all of the ancient texts available to me, whether it's Hebrew, Christian, Islamic, Buddhist, Hindu, humanism, I see the following three characteristics. First of all, we're treated unjustly by others. Forgiveness is in the context of being treated unfairly. Next, we strive to get rid of the resentment that shouldn't have been ours in the first place. Right? We strive to do that willingly, cognitively, and behaviorally. We actually try to get rid of that which was eating up Mr. Keel. Right? The effects of his injustice were eating him alive, and he finally realized that. Okay? So did Joy. Right? So you make the decision, I will try to get rid of the resentment for the other. So I don't engage in a war of words or fists or anything else with the other. Right? The getting rid of the resentment is for the other person. And here's where it gets controversial, because it's a moral virtue of goodness. And this is a high level that many people do not reach, but that doesn't mean you're not engaging in forgiveness. You strive as best you can to offer a goodness of some kind to the one who hurt you, such as being kind, respectful, generous, or, gulp, gasp, dare I say it, agape love towards someone who has hurt you. How ridiculous is that? Somebody stop me. Someone is unjust to you, and then forgiveness says, not only try to get rid of the resentment, but try to offer on its highest level this idea of agape love being in service to the other? Yes. That is what this is, if you choose to engage in it. And many people are so hurt, they can try to get rid of the resentment, and they can't get to that level. That doesn't mean that's not what forgiveness is. That still is what it is at its highest level, but we simply do the best we can where we are today. Again, from my buddy Aristotle, he says, you have to be careful to distinguish what forgiveness is not or more than. Forgiveness is more than accepting what happened. Mr. Keel could have simply said, I accept I'm in a wheelchair. I accept that. That might be curative for him, but what's wrong with that in terms of forgiveness? It's not for the other. I can accept what's happened and dismiss the other. Forgiveness is not just ceasing to be angry or getting rid of resentment. Why? You can get rid of resentment, get rid of the anger, and completely dismiss the other person. You know why I'm not angry? That other is not worth a fight. That other is not worth my time. I am dismissing the other as a person. Might make me feel a little better, but that's not what forgiveness is, because it's not centered on the other person. It's not being neutral toward the other, although that might be part of the pathway. But being neutral toward the other is not being good to the other, and that's what moral virtues are. And that's why this is heroic, and that's why it's a challenge to struggle to be good to the other who was not good to you. And it's not just making oneself feel good. Why? Forgiveness is not simply a self-help strategy to move on in life. That's not what it is. It'll help you to move on, but remember, this is for the one who has hurt you. Forgiveness is not making excuses for what happened. If I had a shilling for every time someone said to me, forgiveness is just simply caving into the other person, stop talking with me about it, I'd have a lot in the bank right now, right? Because people equate forgiveness with excusing the just nature of the action, especially the unjust nature of it. And because I'm striving for justice and all I got was injustice, and now you're telling me to excuse the person? No. Forgiveness always and without exception says what happened to me was unfair, is unfair, and it will always be unfair. It never changes. But my response to the person changes, not redefining the event. You think Mr. Keel would ever say, well, I'm excusing the person who shot me and I'm a quadriplegic, it's not that big a deal? Never, right? It is more than forgetting. We use the term forgive and forget. The late Lewis Smedes, S-M-E-D-E-S, had a classic book in 1984 called Forgive and Forget. He told me he never liked the title. The editor gave him the title because he said, we really don't forget, we remember in new ways. You see, lest it happen again. See, forgiveness doesn't make us completely unaware of what might happen again. We remember in new ways. Right? Forgiveness is more than calming down. I think you know the answer to that now. Because you can calm down for yourself, but that's not what forgiveness is, because you can calm down and dismiss the other. Forgiveness is not exerting power over others. Oh, did I tell you yesterday I forgave you? Did I tell you? Oh, yes. Okay. You owe me. That's a power play. Some people use that, but that's false forgiveness. That's not what forgiveness is. Why? Because you're saying to the other, take my hand and come up out of the pit. Right? You're helping another, not dominating. Power dominates when you're doing power over another. And forgiveness is not the same thing as reconciliation, which is one of the most pressing criticisms against forgiveness. How dare you, Enright, stand up here and talk with me about forgiving when I'm having so much trouble with people from the other side or with my family or with others? You're telling me to go back into that relationship and be abused again? Get off the stage. But I'm not equating forgiving and reconciling. Do you know why? Reconciliation is not a moral virtue. Reconciliation is a negotiation strategy between two or more people who make their way back together again in mutual trust. You can forgive people without trusting them. You can forgive from the heart, from a distance, without entering into that relationship with that person. You can forgive and not reconcile if the other is going to keep abusing you. And that has been one of the biggest criticisms I have faced in my 37 years of studying forgiveness scientifically at a major university. The how dare you idea. But it's not my fault. The fault is they haven't sat at the feet of the great Aristotle to find out what the difference is between forgiving and reconciling. And had they done that, then they wouldn't be yelling at me so much. But that's okay. I forgive them when they make that distinction. They don't make the distinction. It's okay. And forgiveness is not abandoning the quest for justice. People say to me, justice first. I'm going to have justice first and then forgiveness, so stop talking with me about it. And I say to people this. Let's say you're never going to get what you want. Would you rather live with resentment in your heart for the rest of your life, or not get what you want and be at least free from the resentment that could kill you? Which do you prefer? Most people prefer number two, and then they'll realize, you know what? I can bring justice and forgiveness together. If someone's abusing you, if you forgive the person, how you talk to that person might be qualitatively different. You can also call 911 in the United States. That's the emergency number. Right? You can protect your children from someone who has abused you when you were a child. You can forgive and seek justice. Very, very important. Jaha, this one's not moving. Let's try it again. Okay, no, which one? This one? Okay. So forgiveness also is not a skill. Forgiveness is the practice of a moral virtue. And so a skill is the kind of specific behavior toward a specific end that does not necessarily include the thinking and the feeling and the behaving. It's not a psychological technique. So many people now, because forgiveness is popular, end up saying, well, forgiveness is just if you engage in a certain kind of cognitive behavioral thinking, that's going to simply be enough for us. And forgiveness is not just a decision. Just yesterday, I read an essay in a major magazine, a major national magazine, saying, oh, forgiveness is simple, 4 simple steps to forgiveness. You make a decision to forgive. Is that what forgiveness is? The cognitive idea, okay? Well, let's say you wanted to work in a soup kitchen, and you say, I have decided to work in the soup kitchen, and then you never end up engaging in going into the soup kitchen. It's not just a decision, it includes feelings and action as well. Okay, let's see what we have here. Okay, in summary, forgiveness is a moral virtue, not necessarily a skill or a psychological technique. You as the forgiver can benefit as you offer this, but primarily this is for the other person. And while we're at it, I have a question for you. What's the difference between forgiving someone and being a forgiving person? What's the difference? Here's the big difference in my challenge to you. You can forgive a given person who has hurt you by engaging in certain kind of processes that I will engage with you in about an hour. But to be a forgiving person, Aristotle tells me, you have developed a love of this virtue, and now it becomes part of your life, part of your identity, part of who you are as a person, so you can, in fact, give this away to others. Right? What are some of the goals here? To emotionally heal, that's a goal for myself, to help the other, to possibly reconcile, maybe, maybe not, to practice goodness or love as an end in and of itself, and to be consistent with your own philosophy in life, your own religious tradition. You can be all of these, right? But the why of it, this is a why, is different than what it is. So you could be doing it to heal, as David Keel did, and that's very honorable. But what it is ultimately is being good to those who are not good to you. Right? As you're going to find out, the application in schools is very powerful at times. For example, we did a study early in the century and found that 78% of over 100 instructors in the Milwaukee area said learning about forgiveness in classrooms increased cooperation. 93% said that they themselves as teachers became better persons. The teachers became better persons as they engaged in teaching others about the moral virtues, okay? And 84% said the classroom actually began to function better. So how are agape love and forgiveness connected? Here's how. Forgiveness is much more specifically targeted toward those who have been unfair to you. That's what it is. It's targeted toward those who are unfair to you. Agape can occur toward those who are fair to you, or who are neutral toward you, or whom you have never met. Okay? The moral virtue of forgiveness, here's the bottom line of the essence. The bottom line of forgiveness is that it flows from agape love on its highest level. It flows from an idea that I can be in service to others, even if it's painful for me, for the other person's sake, right? With a benefit to myself. Right? That's one of the paradoxes of forgiveness. As you're good to others, the goodness flows back to you. As you love others, the goodness comes back to you. To repeat from an earlier slide, the highest form of forgiveness is when we strive, even struggle, even when it's painful, to love those who have not loved us. Okay? It's not burnout. Okay? It's not playing a trick on ourselves and reconciling and then being beaten up again. It's not throwing justice under the bus. It is a conscious, deliberate act of goodness toward others, and it's hard. And that's what I like about it. Thank you.